Hey everyone, and welcome to a deep dive that'll take us straight into the heart of international business.
Oh, I like that, getting right into the thick of
We're
things.
going to be using this fantastic book as our guide. It's called International Business Strategy and Cross-Cultural Management.
Ah, excellent choice. A
Mhm.
really great resource for anyone looking to grasp, the complexities of the global business environment.
And it was written by a pretty impressive team as well. Nicole Franziska, Richter, Jesper Stranskov,
Sven Hoff.
right, and Vasil Taras.
Yeah, these authors, they're not just academics. They bring years of experience teaching and researching.
So real-world expertise.
Exactly. They've been in the trenches.
Mm.
They understand how international business really works.
Okay, so no stuffy theory here.
No, not at all.
So what's the mission for today's deep dive?
Well, think of it this way. We're going to give you the tools and the knowledge to really dissect international markets
Okay.
and understand what makes them tick, so you can make smarter decisions in this crazy interconnected world.
Like deciphering the DNA of global business success.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great way to put it.
So let's get started. Let's crack this code.
Let's do it.
And I think a natural starting point is the economic landscape of a country. And whenever we're talking about economics, GDP comes up.
Oh, yeah, it's the big one, right?
Right, but beyond the headlines, we see GDP numbers thrown around all the time.
Mm-hmm.
What are we actually looking for when we try to assess a country's potential using GDP? What's the story behind those numbers?
Well, you're right to look beyond the overall GDP figure, because while it gives us a sense of the size of the economy, the total economic activity,
Yeah.
it doesn't tell us the whole story.
Right.
It's kind of like looking at I don't know, the horsepower of a car without knowing its fuel efficiency or its handling.
Okay.
So to get a clearer picture, a more nuanced understanding, we look at GDP per capita,
Okay.
which is essentially the GDP divided by the population.
Yep.
And that gives us a better sense of the average standard of living.
So a higher GDP per capita generally means a wealthier population.
Right. Generally speaking, yes. But even then, that's not the whole picture.
It's not the whole picture.
No.
Okay.
Because we also need to consider the size and the growth of the middle class.
The middle class, why is that so important?
Well, the middle class is really the engine of so many economies.
Okay.
A strong middle class means you have more people with disposable income,
Right.
more people who can afford to buy goods and services.
It's a good sign.
Yeah, it's like having a large and growing customer base, ready to embrace new products and services.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, another thing we often hear about is analyzing GDP by sector,
Right.
breaking it down into agriculture, industry services, things like that.
Yeah.
How does that deepen our understanding?
I like to think of it as kind of peeking under the hood of the economy,
Okay.
because by analyzing these different sectors, we can see where a country's economic strengths lie,
Okay.
but also where its potential weaknesses might be. So, for example, if a country is heavily reliant on exporting agricultural products,
Uh,
well, they might be very vulnerable to changes in global commodity prices.
right. It's like assessing a company's portfolio.
Yeah,
Diversification is key.
exactly. Diversification is key for countries just like it is for companies.
Okay, now we can't talk about the global economy without addressing the digital economy.
It's everywhere, right?
It's transforming everything, it seems. But how do we measure a country's digital readiness?
Mm-hmm.
It's more than just, do they have internet access or not, right?
Bro, absolutely. It's
Yeah.
it's much more nuanced than that. I
I
mean,
love
think
that.
about it. Even if people have access to the internet, if the connection is slow,
Right.
that's going to be a major bottleneck for businesses.
It's true because in the digital world, speed is everything.
It really is. And that's where the World Bank's Digital Adoption Index comes in handy.
Okay.
It looks at a bunch of factors beyond just basic internet penetration.
Okay.
Things like the availability of secure servers,
Oh.
mobile phone usage, download speeds, all these things that really paint a picture of a country's digital infrastructure.
That's interesting.
Yeah,
So it's not just about connectivity, but also about the quality of that connectivity.
exactly. And even beyond that, we have to consider the impact of technologies like robotics and artificial intelligence.
These are game changers.
They're reshaping global value chains as we speak.
And we're seeing that in real time right now.
Absolutely.
It's fascinating.
Automation, for example, might lead some companies to, what we call reshore manufacturing,
Okay.
bring production back closer to their main markets.
Okay.
And 3D printing could completely decentralize production,
Right.
enabling these kind of localized manufacturing hubs.
So it's a really dynamic landscape.
It is full of possibilities and challenges.
A lot to consider. Okay, so we've explored a country's internal economic landscape.
Mm-hmm.
Now let's zoom out a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Look at how they interact with the global marketplace.
Okay.
Where do we begin?
Well, I think trade flows are a great place to start.
Trade flows.
Yeah, we're talking about the movement of goods and services across borders, exports, imports,
Okay.
and analyzing these flows can really reveal how integrated a country is in the global economy.
So a country that exports a lot is deeply connected to that global web.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're playing an active role in the exchange of goods and services on a global scale.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about investments?
Ah, yes,
How do
investments.
those play into a country's global standing?
Well, we have to talk about foreign direct investment, or
Hmm.
FDI.
Okay, FTI.
Now, this isn't about, quick trades or anything like that. This is about long-term commitments.
Okay.
Companies are investing in foreign countries by building factories, acquiring businesses,
Hmm.
forming partnerships,
Yeah.
and that signals a real vote of confidence in a country's long-term potential.
Okay, so FDI, it's more than just money. It's like a statement of belief in that country's future.
Exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like saying, hey, we believe in you. We're willing to put down roots here.
Okay, now, we often hear about countries having a trade surplus
Yeah.
or a trade deficit.
Right, right.
What's the significance of that for international business?
Well, the trade balance, whether a country exports more than it imports, that's a surplus,
Okay.
or vice versa, that's a deficit.
Yeah.
It can be pretty revealing.
Okay.
Now, a surplus might seem like a good thing, right?
On the surface, yeah.
On the surface, but it's important to dig a little deeper
Okay.
because a country's export dependency ratio,
Export dependency ratio.
yeah, that tells us how reliant they are on international trade for their overall economy.
Okay.
So a high ratio,
Meaning they export a lot.
exactly, can actually make a country more vulnerable to global economic shocks.
Because if something happens to that global market,
Exactly, their economy could take a big hit.
so diversification is key.
Diversification is always key. Yeah, don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Don't put all your eggs in one export basket in this case, right?
That's right. Spread the risk.
Spread the risk. Okay. But it's not just about economic forces at play, right?
Yeah.
The political and regulatory landscapes that can make or break a business as well.
Oh, absolutely. They're crucial.
Right.
Think of it this way. A country with a stable and transparent government
Huh?
that's like a well-maintained highway,
Right.
businesses can operate smoothly, efficiently.
Yeah.
But a country with a lot of political instability or corruption, that's like a road full of potholes and detours.
Makes it much harder to do business.
Much harder. Yeah, it can be a real headache.
So how do we actually assess these political and regulatory risks?
Well, there are some tools that can help us navigate this terrain.
Okay.
One of them is the World Governance Indicators.
Right.
These indicators, they evaluate a country's performance across 6 key dimensions.
6.
Yeah, things like voice and accountability, political stability, government effectiveness,
Wow, that's a lot.
regulatory quality, rule of law, and control of corruption.
These are some heavy-hitting factors.
They're really important for businesses.
So a high score across these indicators suggests a more stable and transparent environment.
Generally speaking, yes, that's a good sign.
Okay.
And then there's another tool called the Heritage Foundation's Economic Freedom Index.
Okay.
This one focuses more on things like property rights, government spending, regulatory efficiency, all those things that are crucial for a thriving business environment.
So it's like a report card for how business-friendly a country is.
Exactly. Yeah, it gives you a sense of how easy or difficult it is to do business in a particular country.
And then we have the World Bank's Ease of Doing Business Index.
Yeah, another great resource.
What's the focus there?
This one really gets down to the nitty-gritty of daily operations.
Okay.
So it looks at things like how easy is it to start a business?
Mm-hmm.
How easy is it to get construction permits? Get electricity and force contracts?
So very practical consideration.
Very practical, yeah. It's all about cutting through the red tape.
Right, because nobody wants to be bogged down by bureaucracy.
Exactly.
Now, we've talked about hard data regulations, but the business landscape isn't just about numbers, is it?
No, it's not.
There's a human element, the cultural context, and that plays a huge role as well.
Oh, a huge role. Culture can make or break a business deal.
Right.
It's not just about speaking the language, it's
Yeah.
about understanding the unspoken rules, the values, the beliefs that shape people's behavior.
So how do we even begin to decode these cultural intricacies? Are there frameworks that can guide us?
There are, yeah. Luckily, there are some frameworks that can help us navigate this complex terrain.
Okay.
And one of the most well-known is Geert Hofstede's cultural dimensions theory.
I've heard of those.
Yeah,
Power distance individualism versus collectivism.
exactly.
Can you give us a quick rundown of how these dimensions actually play out in the business world?
Sure. So imagine you're launching a marketing campaign in a country with high power distance,
Okay.
where hierarchy and authority are very important. Well, your messaging might need to reflect that, emphasizing the expertise and the prestige of your brand.
So tailoring your approach to that specific cultural context.
Exactly. One size does not fit all in the global marketplace.
No, it doesn't. What about other cultural frameworks? I've heard of something called the Globee Project.
Yes, pronounced global.
Global as in around the globe.
Right, exactly. It builds upon Hofstede's work,
Okay.
and it identifies 9 cultural dimensions.
9.
Yeah, it provides a really nuanced view of cultural values and practices. And what's interesting is that it distinguishes between should be values
Oh.
and as is practices.
So what people say they value and how they actually behave might be different.
Exactly. Yeah, it's acknowledging that there can be a gap between the ideal and the reality.
It's a good point. Now, is culture really that uniform within a country?
That's a great question. And the answer is no.
Oh,
There's diversity within every country.
right.
People hold different values, beliefs, even cultural identities.
So we're zooming in from the big picture of national culture to the micro level of individual and regional variations.
Exactly. Yeah, it's important to remember that culture is not monolithic.
So how do we account for that complexity in international business?
Well, that's where the concept of cultural clusters comes in.
Cultural clusters.
Yeah, these clusters group countries based on shared cultural traits.
Okay.
Things like geography, language, religion, history.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, Ronan and Shenkar's cultural clustering
Okay.
identifies distinct groups like the Anglo cluster, the Latin American cluster, the Confucian Asian cluster.
So it's like a map of cultural kinship.
Yeah, a way of seeing which countries share similar cultural DNA.
Interesting. But even within those clusters, you're still going to have individual variations, right?
Oh, absolutely. Even within a cluster, there's going to be a lot of diversity.
Okay.
Think of cultural archetypes as like distinct combinations of cultural values.
Cultural archetypes.
Yeah, so you might have someone who's a masculine individualist, someone who thrives on competition and achievement.
Yeah.
Or you might have a masculine collectivist, someone who prioritizes group harmony, but is also very assertive.
So recognizing that individuals, even within the same cultural cluster or company, can have very different cultural personalities.
Exactly. Yeah. And this awareness is really important when you're tailoring strategies within organizations
Okay.
or for specific teams.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
We've covered a lot of ground here, from broad economic indicators
Yeah.
to, nuanced cultural archetypes.
It's a lot to take in.
It is, and it's
It's-
all interconnected.
That's the beauty of it. It's all connected.
And speaking of interconnectedness, are there tools to actually measure these cultural values at an individual level?
There are some validated instruments like the CV scale,
Okay.
which measures cultural orientations across various dimensions.
Okay.
And that can be really useful for tailoring strategies within organizations or specific teams.
So we can go from the macro level of national culture to the micro level of individual perspectives within a team.
Exactly. Yeah, it's fascinating how it all connects.
I love how it all
Me
connects.
too. That's what makes international business so interesting and so challenging.
And that brings us to the end of part 1 of our deep dive into analyzing international markets.
Yeah.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We have, but there's still so much more to explore.
There is. Stay tuned, because in part 2, we're going to delve deeper into applying these frameworks and really navigating the complexities of international business.
I can't wait. Let's do it. Welcome back to our deep dive into the world of international business. We've laid a really solid foundation by understanding the economic, the political, the regulatory, and the cultural landscapes.
Yeah, it's like we've assembled our global toolkit,
Exactly.
But now we need to actually put that knowledge into action,
Right.
right? Companies need to make strategic choices about where to invest their resources, how to expand their operations.
Exactly. And the stakes are high. I mean,
Right.
imagine launching a product in a new market without really understanding the local culture or consumer preferences.
Yeah, it could be a recipe for disaster.
It could be a very expensive mistake.
So how do companies avoid those costly mistakes?
Yeah.
Where do they even begin when analyzing a specific market for potential entry?
Well, it all starts with revisiting those economic indicators we discussed earlier. GDP, GDP per capita, the size of the middle class,
Right.
they give us that initial snapshot of a country's economic health.
Yeah, that baseline picture.
Exactly, but we need to go deeper than that.
Okay, so it's not just about looking at broad economic trends, but also diving into the specifics of each market.
Precisely. Yeah. Let's say, for example, a company is considering entering the consumer electronics market in a particular country.
Okay.
Well, in addition to looking at the overall GDP and per capita income,
Hmm.
they'd want to know things like smartphone penetration rates,
Hmm.
internet access, consumer spending patterns on electronics.
So it's like market research on steroids.
That's a great way to put it, yeah.
We need that granular level of detail.
You do to really tailor our strategies effectively.
And let's not forget about those political and regulatory factors we talked about.
Oh, yes. Institutional theory can really guide us here.
Right. So a stable and transparent political system, it's like fertile ground for businesses to flourish.
Exactly. It creates that predictable environment that businesses need to thrive.
So we need to assess the stability of the government, the transparency of legal systems, the level of corruption.
Absolutely. All of those factors can have a huge impact on a company's ability to operate smoothly.
And to protect their investments.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't want to put your money into a country where you're not sure if the rules are going to change overnight.
It's like navigating a minefield.
It can be. Yeah, one wrong step could have disastrous consequences.
So we've looked at the economic landscape. We've considered the political landscape.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what about that cultural piece of the puzzle? How do we factor that into our market analysis?
Culture is absolutely essential, and this is where those cultural dimensions frameworks from Hofstede and the Global Project really come into play.
Global, as in around the globe.
Exactly. Global, as in around the globe.
Right. Okay. So power distance individualism
Mm-hmm.
versus collectivism, uncertainty avoidance,
Yeah.
all those factors can really influence how we approach a market.
Can you give us a real world example of how these cultural dimensions actually play out in international business?
I think that would be really helpful.
Sure. So let's imagine a company is launching a marketing campaign in a highly collectivistic culture.
Okay.
Well, they want to emphasize group harmony and family values in their messaging,
Good.
rather than focusing solely on individual achievement as they might in a more individualistic culture.
So it's not just about translating your message, it's about understanding those deeper cultural values.
Exactly. You have to adapt your approach to resonate with the local culture.
And what about those cultural clusters we discussed? How do they factor into market analysis?
Well, they can be really helpful in identifying groups of countries with similar cultural values.
Oh, right.
So if a company has been successful in one country within a particular cluster, they might have a higher likelihood of succeeding in other countries within that same cluster.
So it's like having a cultural roadmap to guide your expansion strategy.
Yeah, that's a great way to think about it.
But let's bring this down to earth with a real-world example.
Mm.
Can you walk us through how a company might actually use these frameworks to analyze a potential market?
Sure. Let's imagine a company that manufactures high-end athletic apparel, and they're considering expanding into Southeast Asia.
Okay, athletic apparel, Southeast Asia.
Exactly. So they'd start by looking at the economic indicators.
Okay, GDP growth rate per capita income.
Exactly. Are there a lot of people with disposable income who might be interested in buying their products?
They need to know if there's a market there in the first place.
Right, exactly. And then they'd want to look at the specifics of the athletic apparel industry in Southeast Asia. So they do some research on current trends, major competitors, any local brands that dominate the market.
Okay, so they're getting a sense of the competitive landscape.
Exactly. And then, of course, they need to consider the political and regulatory environment.
Right. Are there any trade barriers or restrictions on foreign investment?
Exactly. Can they operate smoothly within the existing legal framework?
Okay, so those are really important questions.
They are. And then comes the cultural piece. You know, what are the dominant cultural values in Southeast Asia?
How do people view health and fitness? What are their fashion preferences?
Exactly. And those cultural dimensions frameworks can be really helpful here.
Okay.
So they'd want to understand things like power distance individualism versus collectivism, uncertainty avoidance,
Right.
to tailor their marketing messages, their business practices accordingly.
So it's like assembling this giant jigsaw puzzle. You have to consider all the pieces.
You do to get that complete picture.
And that's what makes analyzing international markets so fascinating and so challenging.
It requires that blend of analytical skills, cultural sensitivity, and strategic thinking.
It's not just about crunching numbers. It's about Understanding people cultures and how business works in different parts of the world.
Exactly.
Now, are there any common pitfalls that companies should avoid when analyzing international markets?
Oh, there are definitely some traps to watch out for.
Okay, what's the biggest one?
I'd say one of the most common mistakes is relying solely on secondary data.
Okay.
Report statistics, things like that.
Right.
While valuable, they can't replace firsthand insights.
You had to get out there and talk to people.
Exactly. Yeah, you need to do market research, customer surveys, conversations with local experts.
Because it's like the difference between reading a travel guide and actually visiting a place,
No,
right? Yeah.
exactly. You get a much richer understanding when you experience it firsthand.
What are some other pitfalls to watch out for?
Well, failing to adapt to local cultural norms is another classic blunder.
Okay, so don't just assume that what works in your home country will work everywhere else.
Yeah. Exactly. You have to be willing to adjust your approach to fit the local culture.
Okay.
And this can manifest in everything from your marketing campaigns to your business etiquette.
Right, so a company that tries to impose its home country's cultural values on a foreign market,
Yeah, they're likely to face resistance.
it's about respecting and adapting to the local culture, not trying to force a square peg into a round hole.
Exactly. Find that common ground, build those bridges.
Okay, what about the logistical side of things?
Ah, yes. Logistics, another potential minefield.
Right,
Companies often underestimate the complexity of international logistics.
because it's more than just putting something on a ship and sending it across the ocean.
Oh, it's much more than that. You have to deal with shipping tariffs, customs regulations.
And it can be a nightmare if you're not prepared.
It can be a logistical nightmare. Yeah.
We've all heard those horror stories about shipments getting stuck in customs or products arriving damaged due to poor handling.
Exactly. And those delays and those damages can really eat into your profits.
Any other words of caution?
I'd say another common mistake is underestimating the importance of building strong relationships with local partners.
Local partners, why are they so important?
Well, it's not just about doing business in a country. It's about doing business with the people in that country.
Right.
And cultivating those relationships, those partnerships can be invaluable.
Okay, so it's about more than just transactions. It's about building trust and understanding.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that business is ultimately about human connections.
Now, all of this is great advice, but analyzing international markets, it can be daunting, especially for smaller companies with limited resources.
Yeah, it can be a lot to take on.
So what are some tips for streamlining the process, making it a little bit less overwhelming?
Well, one approach is to focus on a few key markets rather than trying to tackle everything at once.
Okay,
Pick your battles strategically.
so be selective.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Choose markets where your products or services have the highest chance of success.
Okay, so it's about prioritizing your efforts.
Yeah.
What about leveraging technology? Can that help simplify the process?
Oh, absolutely. Technology can be a huge help. There are some fantastic online tools and resources available
Right.
that can provide really valuable insights into different markets. You can access market research reports, economic data,
Mm-hmm.
even cultural intelligence platforms.
It's like having a virtual team of international business experts at your fingertips.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, technology can really level the playing field.
But technology can only take us so far, right?
That's right. At the end of the day, analyzing international markets, it's about more than just data and algorithms.
It's about people,
It's about people. It's about understanding their motivations, their needs.
aspirations.
Exactly. And it's about connecting with different cultures, finding ways to bridge those gaps.
So how do we know if we've done a good job analyzing a potential market? What's the ultimate test?
Well, the ultimate test is whether our analysis leads to informed decisions and successful outcomes.
Because it's not just about gathering information. It's
Mhm.
about using that information to make strategic choices that actually drive business growth.
Precisely. And that's what we'll explore in part 3 of our deep dive.
Okay.
We'll delve into the strategic implications of market analysis
Mhm.
and how companies can use their insights to make smart decisions about market entry, product development, and global expansion.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We've really been exploring those intricate landscapes of international markets.
We've gone from those big economic indicators
Right.
all the way to those really subtle cultural nuances.
And through it all, we've kind of been assembling this powerful toolkit for analyzing potential markets.
True.
Really understanding the lay of the land before making those big
Yeah,
decisions.
getting that foundation right.
Right. But, tools are only as good as the hands that wield them, right?
Yeah, that's a good point.
So how do we actually translate all this analysis, all this knowledge into strategic action, How do companies actually make their entrance into a new market?
Well, that's where the real strategic thinking begins, right?
Okay.
There's not just one way to enter a new market.
Yeah.
There are a variety of what we call market entry strategies,
Okay.
and each one comes with its own advantages and disadvantages, its own pros and cons.
Okay.
So you have to choose wisely.
So let's go through some of what's a common approach?
Well, one common approach is exporting,
Okay. Export.
which is basically producing goods in your home country and then shipping them to the foreign market.
Okay. So you're keeping production at home and just sending the finished product overseas.
Exactly.
Now, that seems like a relatively low-risk way to test the waters, right?
It can be, yeah. It allows the company to kind of dip their toes into a new market without making a huge upfront investment.
Okay, so lower risk, but I imagine there's some challenges as well.
Oh, of course, there are always challenges.
What are some of those?
Well, transportation costs can be significant.
Right, especially with all the supply chain issues happening these days.
Exactly. And then there are tariffs, which are taxes imposed on imported goods.
Okay,
And there's always the potential for delays, with shipping and customs.
so you're dealing with a lot of external factors that you can't really control.
That's right. So it's a trade-off between risk and control.
Okay, what are some other options for companies looking to expand internationally?
Well, licensing or franchising is another popular strategy.
Okay, I've heard of those,
Mm.
but can you remind us how they work?
Sure. So with licensing, you're essentially granting a foreign company the right to use your brand,
Okay.
your technology, your business model in exchange for fees or royalties.
So you're kind of renting out your brand in a way.
You could think of it that way, yeah.
So you're leveraging someone else's local expertise and their existing infrastructure.
Exactly.
Right.
And that can be a great way to expand quickly with relatively low risk.
Okay,
A
a
little
little
bit.
risk,
Yeah.
but you do give up some control, right?
You relinquish some control over how your brand is represented and how the business is operated.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, there's also foreign direct investment, or FDI, which we talked about earlier.
Right, FDI.
That's a much bigger commitment, isn't it?
It is, yeah, it's a big step.
Putting down roots in a new country.
Exactly. Yeah, FDI involves establishing a physical presence in the foreign market.
Okay.
So you might do that through a joint venture,
Okay.
a wholly owned subsidiary, or even an acquisition.
So you're really building a long-term presence.
You are, yeah, it's a much bigger commitment.
What are the advantages of that approach?
Well, FDI offers greater control over your operations
Okay.
and potentially higher profits, but of course it also comes with higher risks.
Because you're investing a lot more.
Exactly. It requires a significant investment, and it's not a decision to be taken lightly.
Okay, so companies have a range of options,
Mm.
from exporting to licensing to FDI,
They do.
and they have to weigh the pros and cons of each entry strategy and choose the one that really aligns best with their goals and resources.
Exactly. And there's no one-size-fits-all approach.
Right, it's all about context.
It is the optimal strategy depends on a variety of factors. The company's industry, their risk tolerance, the specific characteristics of that target market.
So many things to consider.
There are...
It's like a strategic chess game, you know?
It is.
You have to carefully consider each move
Absolutely.
and try to anticipate the consequences.
That's the name of the game.
But market entry, that's just the first step, right?
It is.
What happens once a company has established a presence in a new market? What's next?
Well, then the focus shifts to developing a winning product strategy.
Okay, product strategy. So we can't just assume that a product that sells well in one market will automatically be a hit in another.
No, we can't. And this is where those cultural differences we talked about can really make a big difference.
Ah, yes, cultural differences, consumer preferences, those can vary so widely from country to country.
They can. A product that's wildly popular in one country might completely fall flat in another.
Right, and that's why market research is so important.
It's essential.
So companies need to think about how to adapt their products or services to meet the unique needs and preferences of the local market.
Exactly. And that might involve modifying product features, changing the packaging, or even coming up with a whole new product line.
So it's about finding that sweet spot between staying true to your brand identity and also catering to local tastes.
It's a balancing act.
What about pricing strategies? I imagine those must vary quite a bit from country to country as well.
Oh, absolutely. Companies need to research local pricing norms
Okay.
and consider factors like tariffs, transportation costs, currency fluctuations.
Right, because if you price your product too high, you might alienate customers.
Exactly.
But if you price it too low, you could erode your profitability.
Exactly. So it's about finding that right price point.
It's a complex equation
It
with
is.
a lot of variables to consider.
It really is.
Okay, so we've talked about market entry, we've talked about product strategy now. What about marketing and distribution?
Ah,
How do
yes.
companies actually get their products or services in front of potential customers in a new market? It's a crowded marketplace out there.
It is, and this is where understanding the local culture and consumer behavior is absolutely paramount.
Okay.
Companies need to tailor their marketing messages, their distribution channels, to really reach their target audience effectively.
So what works in one country might not work in another.
Exactly. A company might need to use different advertising platforms,
Okay.
partner with local retailers, or even adapt their brand messaging.
To resonate with that local culture.
Exactly. It's all about understanding how people in that market consume information,
Hmm.
how they make purchasing decisions, how they interact with
So
brands.
it requires a deep understanding of not just economics and regulations,
Right.
but also psychology and sociology
Exactly. It's about connecting with people on a cultural level.
and building relationships that go beyond just mere transactions.
Precisely. It's not just about selling products. It's about building trust, creating value for customers in that new market.
Right, building those long-term relationships.
Exactly.
And that's where I think the true magic of international business lies.
Yeah. Mm.
It's an opportunity to bridge cultural divides, to create meaningful connections, to contribute to a more interconnected world.
Well said.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into analyzing international markets,
Mm.
what are some key takeaways for our listeners?
Hmm.
What are those essential things to keep in mind when venturing into the global arena?
Well, I think first and foremost, remember that thorough market analysis is crucial for making informed decisions.
Right.
Don't jump in headfirst without gathering the data, understanding the trends, assessing the risks.
Do your homework before you make any big moves.
Exactly. And second, remember that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to international business.
Okay.
The optimal strategy, it depends on the unique characteristics of each company and its target market.
So be flexible, be adaptable, be willing to tailor your strategies to that specific context.
Exactly. And finally, never underestimate the importance of cultural sensitivity.
Right. Cultural sensitivity is key.
It is understanding the local culture, the values, the norms. That's essential for building trust and connecting with customers in a meaningful way.
So it's about building bridges, not walls.
Exactly.
Well, this has been an incredible deep dive. I feel like we've really covered a lot of ground.
We've gone from economic indicators to cultural nuances to strategic market entry. It's been a whirlwind tour.
It has, but it's been so insightful, and I hope our listeners feel empowered to approach international markets with a sense of confidence and a spirit of curiosity.
Me too. Absolutely. The world of international business, it's constantly evolving. So keep learning, stay curious, and never stop exploring.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me.